Good morning and welcome to day 6 of Streaming Media East Connect, panel 2 of day 6, in fact. This has been our biggest Streaming Media Connect virtual event yet, and it's not going to be our last. We're going to do another Streaming Media Connect in August, but we are also already working on our return to in-person events with Streaming Media West in Huntington Beach in November. And Steve Nathans-Kelly will post a link to that site, that show in the chat. If you're interested in speaking at Streaming Media West, or if you're interested in sponsoring, all the information you need will be right there. A couple of housekeeping notes. As always, this session and all of our sessions are available in the archives on our YouTube channel within about 24 hours after the live broadcast. And we are going to leave the chat open, but we requested if you have questions for our panel that you put them in the Q&A tab. Jonathan Hurd, our moderator, will be monitoring that Q&A tab throughout the panel discussion and will pose those questions as they come in. Before we jump into the discussion, though, we do have a video message from our sponsor, Signient, who's been helping us bring this entire Streaming Media East Connect event to you. And we've got a short video message from Signient right now.
When the director calls action.
And action.
When the game is on. Or it's time to save the universe again. Media Shuttle is there. Trusted by more than 25,000 media companies, Media Shuttle delivers, making it easy and secure to send any size file anywhere fast. The journey begins with Media Shuttle portals, customized and branded for any project and designed to be so easy, your end users will love it. All while giving operations teams complete control through a simple yet powerful admin interface. Add users, set permissions, customize file delivery specs, and report on all activity. Blast off with proprietary acceleration technology. Media Shuttle moves your content anywhere in the internet-connected world at hyper speeds. Along the way, your files are protected. Our commitment to enterprise-grade security has made Media Shuttle a preferred tool with Hollywood studios, major sports leagues, broadcasters, and more. With Media Shuttle, your files are never handed over to Signient. File movement is orchestrated between the end user's workstation and your storage, whether on-prem or in the cloud. Your IT team simply provisions your storage, connecting it to the Media Shuttle cloud service, and Signient handles the rest. Get started on your Media Shuttle journey today, a journey without limits.
And I would also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, Eluvio. And Eluvio's Michelle Munson will be joining the discussion. The discussion that will be led by Jonathan Hurd from Altman Solon, whose company has done some research into the impact of COVID-19 on streaming video, as well as what is coming around the corner. And it's funny, of course, we have had a panel devoted to how COVID-19 has affected OTT and streaming video since the first Streaming Media East Connect back in May of last year. At that time, I didn't think we'd be doing it again a year from now or a year from then, but here we are. And it is a topic that has come up at every one of our other panel discussions, though. So clearly it's something that everyone is still thinking about. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jonathan and our panelists have to say about it. So with that, I'll pass the mic to you, Jonathan.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric. Looking forward to a discussion with our panelists. And I'd like to kick it off by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Michelle.
Hi, Jonathan. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Munson. Thanks for having us today. I'm co-founder and CEO of Eluvio, sponsor of the panel. Probably more pertinently to this discussion today, we launched Eluvio Live, really as coming out of the pandemic, and I'm going to talk some about that today, but the situation that emerged with just video consumption combined with need really changed everything for us, and it made this a particularly pertinent topic.
Great. And Ty Randolph.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Ty Randolph, President and Chief Operating Officer of Kevin Hart's Laugh Out Loud Network. We are a platform, comedic entertainment company with multiple divisions across audio. We have a studio division where we develop and produce content for our network and for third parties. We have an experiential division, which was sort of dormant during COVID, but we're really excited to talk about, sort of like what some of this opening up means for that. And then our network, which through which we distribute a fast channel that's distributed on pretty much all of the major AVOD channels and reach 100 million consumers every month.
Great. And Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Howard. I'm founder and managing director of Howard & Associates. We are a consulting company that, interestingly enough, helps organizations implement video communications. So predominantly video conferencing and video streaming, digital signage, anything that's sort of video in the enterprise. So pandemic has, there's been a lot of changes in the enterprise, and the pandemic has certainly shown those off, and we've been able to help a bunch of organizations work their way through it. And then I think I'll be talking a little bit about what the return to the office is now that, it looks like the case numbers are coming down and everything's looking better. What does that mean moving forward, which I think is what everybody's probably more concerned with now. So we've been able to work with some of the largest organizations in the world, like Deloitte, BlackRock, Aetna, Travelers, to help them with their video initiatives. So I have a lot of good information from a lot of different people implementing different solutions. Thank you for having me.
Great. And I'll just give a quick intro of Altman Solon. We're a strategy consulting firm with 350 people in 12 offices, and we focus completely on technology, media, and telecom industries. And one of the things that we do in normal times as well as pandemic times is conduct self-funded surveys of consumers and enterprises. But I'd like to kick this off by sharing some of the findings, a handful of findings from the surveys that we conducted during the pandemic. So hopefully you are seeing the screen here.
Looks good.
Excellent. So we asked, this was last summer, we did a number of different surveys on different topics. This one was actually from a movie survey, but we asked, compared to before the pandemic, which of the following best describes how much home video your household is watching? And the most striking thing is subscription video on demand. Nearly 40% of respondents said more or much more SVOD. Basic TV, premium TV, and even other forms like physical media. People probably dug out some of their old DVDs and Blu-ray discs to watch as well. And they did online purchase and rental. For people who subscribe to live pay TV service, we asked the same question about, is it more, the same, or less compared to before COVID? And half of the respondents who subscribe to pay TV in this 25 to 44 age range said they were watching more. So nearly everyone was either the same or more. A few people said less, but overall, we saw this big surge in video viewing. And particularly around news, we asked, how has the pandemic affected the amount of time you spend consuming news weekly from all sources? So not just TV, but you could see there was a big surge in interest in people saying, I spend 6 or more hours a week, 3 to 6, 1 to 2. Very few people said less than before. And on Friday, just to highlight some of the different search terms that have been trending on Google, took a look at, since our panel represents a wide range of the ecosystem here, took a look at these 4 terms, and Zoom really surged, and Andy will be talking more about that. Netflix also surged at the start of the pandemic. Not surprisingly, sports dipped, movie theaters really dipped down. And then over time, you can see Netflix has been, somewhat seasonal, but trending down a bit. Sports not yet recovered to where it was pre-pandemic. Movie theater still has a way to go to increase. Now, Zoom has stayed above where it was before the pandemic started, but overall, we could still see that there is a high level of interest, but some recovery still, likely to happen. And one of the things we asked about, again, this was last summer, what pandemic-related activity restrictions, when they are, what activity are you most looking forward to resuming? The number one topic or activity was go to sit-down restaurants or bars. And it was somewhat age skewed, but then you move down the list here a bit, go to movie theaters or bowling alleys. What was really fascinating here is even though it's high on the list, very age skewed, not as interesting a topic or an activity to do for 55 plus. So, just taking a look at the degree of feeling comfortable doing different things, movie theaters was, about 30% of people said they'd be comfortable about 3 months after a vaccine is available. So, we're still seeing, though, a lot of hesitance, as we didn't ask about the rate of vaccination here, but concert venues and gyms, people are more hesitant. Restaurants, a bit less hesitant. So taking a look at that, we added restaurant to the Google Trends, and that is really surging to levels well above where they were during the pandemic, or even before the pandemic hit. So, one of the questions that this raised for me was, what's likely to happen as the pandemic eases? Are we going to see a continued high level of interest in streaming? Are we going to see people doing things that they couldn't do during the pandemic? So we'll get to that topic. But first of all, let's just start with each of you. How did the pandemic affect your business? And, both in terms of not just your revenues, but how you do business. And I don't know, Michelle, if you want to kick things off, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, to say a little bit about Eluvio, we created a new software network for video at scale that is based on just-in-time serving and blockchain access control that's part of the content's whole life cycle. And if you kind of think about where that sat before this, of course, it was interesting to people as far as something to really modernize the supply chain and take out a lot of the phases, because it eliminates the need for CDNs and clouds as we've typically seen them. But during the pandemic, because of this mass emergence of need for both live events and also really the mainstreamization of blockchain, it changed everything for us. And one of the opportunities that came our way was the opportunity to basically bring the content fabric platform to live concerts and music. We were approached by some production companies last summer. We had a ticketing capability developed in the platform at that time as a prototype based on the blockchain contracts that back all the content in the fabric. And that was attractive, combined with the low latency live streaming capability that we have at 4K, to be able to put together something pretty radical. And we did come out in March with a platform called Eluvio Live, which is really the first 4K streaming platform global that essentially has blockchain access control. The ticketing is built into that, and it allows the artist to publisher to basically keep virtually all the revenue, because it's not only owner controlled, but also highly efficient. And we just take a transaction fee on the tickets. But the real story and an important point in this is it has been the way back for not, a wide range of music stars, artists, bands, both small and big. One of the things that's kind of exciting right now, we're doing the first concert back that will be hybrid for the Black Eyed Peas coming up here in early June. They're going to have that filmed live in person with limited audience. And then that filmed concert will be shown live on our platform globally. And the thought here is that this ability to really amplify what was an in-person experience will not only continue, but it's what people, now expect and are really interested in. And then the other wild thing that happened, which we couldn't have anticipated, is this surge of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which are a way to essentially create collectibles from digital art. And it turns out that the content fabric makes it possible to create NFTs from any kind of experience, including entire shows. And so now we've gotten into also minting NFTs that are part of or derivatives of the libraries that people publish, both the live programs as well as on demand. And last Monday, we ended up minting our first major television NFT with Fox, which they introduced at the upfronts and used to kind of announce their entrance into what is essentially blockchain creative endeavors. So all of this, frankly, Jonathan, everybody, never would have happened had this last year not occurred. And so when taking a step back, I mean, none of us know exactly how humanity is going to reorganize itself, but I think there are two things that are just fantastic that have really set in and that we can do something great with. The first is this push to create an amplified live experience that's high quality and that has a chance for the first time to really be publisher controlled. That we've not had any kind of direct video live or on demand distribution of that kind at premium scale at all. It's all through intermediaries, it's all licensed, and this is really a first ever for that. The second thing that I'm also extremely excited about is the fact that we can, for the first time, start to organize these systems in a more decentralized way, which is good for the economics for everybody, vastly more efficient and much more profitability for the creators and better privacy for the audience. But the other thing that it allows us to do is get the internet moved forward. We've been stuck in this phase of really kind of a certain way of organizing live video, which is assumed that we're going to use a 20-year-old CDN architecture and we're going to use a 10 to 15-year-old cloud microservices architecture, and there's no better way to do it, right? And I think this last year has made it possible to innovate forward from that.
Good. So a lot of change driven by the pandemic here. Ty, how has the pandemic affected your business?
At the open, I mentioned the 4 divisions we're in: studios, audio, network, and LOLX, which is our experiential division. So, interestingly for us, it was an interesting time to be a content creator, servicing, both our own networks and others. So we saw an increase in consumption, which really mirrored the slides that you put up at the beginning. Sort of everything went up, right? And our hypothesis was, or the insight from looking, was that, folks who were stuck in the house were looking to diversify their in-home entertainment experiences. So, we have an LOL radio channel on Sirius XM. We produce podcasts in partnership with Sirius, Pandora, and Stitcher. We released an audiobook with Simon & Schuster. And across the board, we saw, sort of record audio consumption, even though sort of for a service like SiriusXM, people weren't in their cars as much. But sort of these ideas that they were looking for entry points for audio only experience that made perhaps multitasking in the house, right? Like a little bit more entertaining and enjoyable. On the streaming side of things, from a studio perspective, we saw an unprecedented demand of content if you could figure out how to get it made, which, sort of like created challenges. So on the, branded content side, where we partner with folks like, Procter & Gamble and Old Spice to produce popular sports shows like Cold as Balls. We figured out ways to take that from an indoor setting to an outdoor setting. We have a 40,000 square foot soundstage out in the valley. And so, we figured out how to safely, produce content, not just for ourselves and for our brand partners, but we, physically produced, Kevin's stand-up special during the pandemic for Netflix. So, and again, it was in front of a mask audience. Things looked very different in how we got back, but we were able to mobilize. And the idea was about how could we be as active as and agile as possible in fulfilling our mission, which is to keep the world laughing together, and to deliver on our same strategy, comedy and color, whenever, wherever our audience wants to laugh. The however became a little bit more complicated, but we doubled revenue during the pandemic. We grew our team by about 60%. And one of the things that we saw sort of a halt with to some degree was on the experiential side. So we just launched our LOLX division 2 months before or a month and a half before the lockdown. And our first big experience was a touring experience in partnership with Viacom and Nick Cannon for his Wild and Out tour. We had increased ticket sales in partnership with him 30% year over year. We were selling out huge stadiums, and that came to a screeching halt. But again, interestingly enough, by being active and agile, we figured out ways to put on virtual events, actually hybrid events during the pandemic. We did a hybrid event that was socially distanced in LA, but broadcast more broadly with Just for Laughs. We partner with them, the biggest comedy festival in the world. We do a big partnership with them every year. We debuted a new comedy special for one of our big comedians, Afion Crockett, and we did it with a drive-in premiere, with a drive-through red carpet and sort of like catering in a box. So really, while we were trying to still deliver on that mission, what was interesting was how we realized how much more, not just choice could we provide for the consumer, but how much choice we had in how we executed things. And so sort of as we walk away from that, I think, one, we think differently about physical presence as a barrier to entry, both for work, like we've hired a ton of folks remotely, onboarded them remotely, have had to sort of like build and develop culture remotely. So we're thinking very differently about where our team has to be and how they engage. And, LOLX, we think there's a huge pent up demand for in-person events. I think that the preference, right, is always going to be to have sort of the highest quality, just as in streaming, right? You want the highest def, experience possible. That's going to be in person. That's going to be with your friends at a stage, like sort of locked arms. And as the numbers go down and as vaccinations go up, we're super bullish about live events next year, right? We're planning a big destination comedy event. However, in-person is no longer an inhibitor from experiencing, and we've all been trained how to connect remotely. And many of us, as Michelle, has alluded to, have actually been investing a lot in making those sort of virtual connections a lot richer. So I think this choice will reveal, but I do think ultimately we found that we're sort of like human beings, and physical connection is still really important.
Great. Well, speaking of virtual connections, Andy, you've seen a surge, obviously, in video conferencing. So tell us about how it's affected you and your business.
Yeah, so I'll give a two-part answer, sort of my business and then more of my client's business. In terms of our business, initially when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? So I've had Deloitte as one of my clients for a long time, and they were actually moving to Zoom prior to all this happening. We did a study for them in 2019 about how that would affect their network. And but overnight, they went from 20,000 people who were doing the trial to over 200,000 on Zoom because everybody got sent home. So obviously that's challenging. And then they started saying, well, how does this impact our whole business moving forward with Zoom rooms and things like that? So there was a lot of, and a lot of companies were having difficulty figuring out, how do I connect my remote people back into the office, whether it's VPN or whatever, but still have them be able to have a good experience over video. So that was kind of early on. And then it was always, well, what are we going to do when people come back to the office? And that was going to be last fall. And then it was beginning of the year. And then it was going to be, well, this summer. And now it looks like people are really finally saying, this fall coming up, with all the vaccines rolling out and everything, we are going to be having people go back into the office. And frankly, I honestly think that people want to go back into the office, but moving forward, I think there's still going to be, just like in the entertainment world, there's going to be hybrid type events, right? So now if you got a bunch of people that are still in the office, there's still a bunch of people that are going to be remote. So you have to be able to allow for those people to have a good experience. And the way that a lot of conference rooms are set up, it's not going to allow that, because you still have the big long tables with the camera up front. And when you have one, a Hollywood Squares kind of like this, but and you're talking to one room and there's a bunch of people up there, but then there's one room with a big long table, you can't even see the people in the room. So there's going to be things like that from user experience that are going to have to change moving forward. And then also from a networking perspective. So I think what people have learned is that once you get it all set up, you're using Zoom or you're using Microsoft Teams or WebEx, when you're at your home, you can connect straight out to the cloud. It doesn't even touch the company network. But when people come back into the office, it's going to be a whole different thing, because you have, much like when you have your house and you've got, kids on Xbox and people doing remote schooling and you have bandwidth challenges, that's the same environment that you have in the office. So you have, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people all trying to go out and do things over video, over your existing internet network. The amount of video that was going over networks is, monumentally higher now than it was back in the day. So when people come back into the office, I think there's going to be challenges there. But overall, I think it's been a good thing for companies to learn the fact that video is a very effective tool, and that we should continue to use it moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. So we've talked a lot about consumer behavior changes and enterprise business changes during the pandemic. What about some of the industry changes? I know, Michelle, you've talked about windowing and the impact of the pandemic and what we saw with HBO Max and Warner deciding to release 2021 movies day and date. What other or even that industry change? What have you all seen in the ways that this has changed the industry?
Well, I'm happy to jump in on this. I think last year around this time, I gave a talk on the Black Swan. I called it the Black Swan year or something to that effect, about the reshaping of the industry. And I mean, what I said there is no big surprise. It's exactly what everyone has been talking about for years, but obviously because of people not being able to consume content so much in person, there was literally a complete reshaping of the windows for theatrical distribution, right? What I think is really interesting here is kind of what I alluded to in my prior comments. I mean, for sure, right now, the SVOD consumption market is completely dominated by essentially streaming services that license their content or create their own content, one of the two, and bring it to consumers, where the lock is really through the internet platform, basically itself. And I think the really, in my view, interesting property that can emerge out of this is if we can once and for all allow for content to actually be sold directly. And to me, we're really on the verge of that, in part because the things Ty said. You've had creators start thinking about things differently. Everybody got really scrappy because they had to this last year, and it took even extremely famous and well-known artists of all kinds, screenwriters, as well as people that are on stage, musicians and other major figures, all looking for new ways to reach their fans. And that, I would call, it's a tipping point moment where folks start to think that way. And then the follow-on point, I think, that also is really interesting here around consumers is because everybody got so familiar with using the internet, the way that you consume content on the internet is more obvious to everyone. People are more comfortable to do it in the first place, but also I think they're more aware of how money is made, quite frankly, and how consumption is done. And one thing that's never called out in these discussions, we all talk about the technology, and that's important because we obviously, premium experience is par and parcel to doing anything. But above and beyond that, the business model today is very much take the audience's data and sell it for advertising. And the services that still control this are the major internet players. And one of the interesting bits about premium content and great live experiences with strong fan bases is they really have the control points, and it could be exploited, right? As in, that's what the audiences are there to see. And so what I'm really suggesting here is that I think this is a tipping point in time where you start to have things line up well enough that, with the right enabling technology, that creators start to look to direct models. And we're definitely right in the middle of that. And I think it's been even further accelerated by blockchain. People are getting comfortable with it. They hear a lot about it. And because of it, the way it works, and also the fact that the way transactions happen are direct, is just forcing this along even more, and also exposing again the conversation about how we can put rights into software. And a good example, I just want to bring this out because it just happened last Monday, that the NFT that we ended up creating for Fox has residuals in it. That is the owner, the creator, Fox and their animation studios essentially have a royalty built into that contract for resale of that NFT. And that technology and the mainstreamization to get an organization as mainstream as Fox doing it, that's a huge change, right? And to me, that's really what's happened this year, that you don't get these kinds of these changes without sort of external shifts in society, right?
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective when you consider during the pandemic there was a big growth in connected TV. Now, some of that is pandemic related, some of it is just the natural progression to the TV. And maybe Ty, could you talk a bit about what you've seen in terms of differences in the platforms on which your consumers have been watching your content?
So it's been interesting. I mean, you opened up the panel talking about sort of what COVID accelerated, right? So I think we were kind of already down this path of, all of the, the streamers that weren't launched had all sort of like put their stakes in the ground and with planned rollouts over the course of this year. And it was interesting to have this very focused attention and this sort of like, this appetite that we hadn't seen from consumers for content. We were sitting in front of screens. We were trying to figure out what to watch next. We had exhausted everything on our bingeable list. And consumers were quickly becoming really savvy, right? Sort of the education of consumers in terms of how to find exactly what they were looking for. This really accelerated. And a lot of times when we talk about consumers, we're thinking about folks who are positioned like us on either coast and who, sort of are in the industry like we are. But I was in sort of like these individual focus groups of one or two, really compelled by how like folks in middle America, my parents are from the South, and how just savvy everyone was in terms of, okay, what is that thing that I'm looking for? How do I being able to navigate their connected device, understanding, sort of like apps and services that I wasn't even aware of. And it's like, wow, this is a consumer that is so in demand. And this isn't just sort of super affluent audiences is, on either coast. This is across demographics, across, sort of like socioeconomic spreads. And so with our FAST channel, we're distributed on a lot of AVOD platforms, Pluto, Tubi, Peacock. And it's
and just to be fast, free ad-supported television, right?
Yes. And so, we talk a lot about the SVOD consumption and that hockey stick, but consumers do understand the value proposition and the trade-off. And so while there is, I can watch this ad-free and I can get the super premium tier of content by, shelling out $9.99, $14.99, $17.99, there's this other opportunity here to really sort of like lean back in a linear experience often, right, with some on-demand options and kind of not think about it. And so I was surprised to see, as we've sort of like talked about SVOD as being this AVOD killer, how strong these AVOD services have been in the market right now. And then, the other thing that I think was accelerated by this in terms of the content that's showing up on all of these platforms, this sort of racial reckoning which sparked in content, what I've been calling this inclusion revolution. We're actually starting to see the dial move in the amount of representation on screen and to see tangible shifts where we weren't seeing anything quantifiable for years and years, and actually to be able to move the marker on that, it just shows sort of like what an accelerator this time has been, the sort of like unprecedented attention, demand. And, I think consumers had a real voice, right? The general public had a real voice here that everyone had to listen to. So those are some of the big sort of leaps that we observed.
Interesting. And Andy, for your business, have you seen differences in how in revenue models that either you or other companies in the business world are charging for your services, or how has data consumption changed behavior of enterprises?
I don't think there's necessarily a change in revenue models, because most of the communications from organizations are internal, for corporate communications, things like that. I mean, obviously marketing departments with ads and branding and things like that, there has been a lot more live video creation by companies for external marketing. But internal, I think the video, consumption patterns have changed dramatically as well. I mean, obviously everybody is familiar now with doing video conferencing, where many people weren't. I mean, I remember doing like happy hours with our friends at the beginning of the pandemic, and people are like, how do I get this? And I'm like, oh my gosh. But now, if somebody's joining a Zoom, everybody knows how to do it, right? It's not that big of a deal. From a live streaming perspective, though, I think the consumption patterns have changed actually relatively dramatically, because I've done, basically enterprise streaming rollouts for a number of companies. And the people would always be like, well, we've got 50,000 people, so we're kind of thinking like 40,000 will attend the CEO broadcast. And I'm like, that is a way overestimate, because, typically the high end of that was like 10%. So if you had 50,000 people, like 5,000 would attend it, right? But now when everybody was at home and actually you get the message like CEO broadcast, and you want to know you're not in the office and you want to know what was going on, the numbers went up incredibly. You'd see like 50, 60, 70% of people were watching these events, whereas before it was 10%. So again, when everybody's at home and you're just going out to your streaming provider and you're being able to access that, that's not going to be a problem. But when people go back into the office, I think that will be a challenge. I think the other thing is the way that people are delivering these events. So for example, streaming media never used the Zoom webinar capability prior to this year, to my knowledge. That's become incredibly popular. But with Zoom, there's no enterprise CDN capability with it. So literally every single person is making a connection out to the internet and pulling an individual stream. So when that's, a couple people in your household, that's not a big deal. But when you have tens of thousands of people in an office environment, that can become very problematic. So, I think, like I said, I think things will sort of revert more back to the mean, and the numbers won't, not that many people will be watching those events live anymore, but I still think it'll be higher than it used to be. And like I said, from the video conferencing perspective, unquestionably that you're going to have people that are both in the office and remote, and you're going to want to create a good video experience for both sides of that equation.
Right. I see a question in the chat around being charged at home for data consumption. And I know during the pandemic, many broadband ISPs waived overage charges, but I'm curious if any of you want to answer the question, what do you see happening as the pandemic is easing here, but people, their consumption of video at home, whether it's being on Zoom remote or consuming AVOD services or whatever, have any of you contemplated that, and what are your thoughts about the impact on broadband consumption?
Maybe I'll say a couple things here. I feel like this is a question we should address to the whole globe, and the answer might be very different, United States versus everywhere else, right? Or and not even everywhere else. It may even be different across pockets of the world. Just a few thoughts. I think that the large bandwidth providers in the United States have well advanced past the idea that limiting bandwidth is in their interest. Quite the opposite. They've made acquisitions and they've invested into content, and they are trying to take a piece of the action, so to speak, as opposed to penalizing the consumption, right? And I think that's a great thing. And then 5G rollouts also help a lot with urban density in terms of bandwidth availability. And then finally, the sustaining through the pandemic with this huge surge in traffic, right, also illustrates the fact that the really expansion of capacity has overall been good. There are parts of the United States that are in a bad shape, rural areas. I come from a farm in Kansas. My parents fight constantly with CenturyLink. And if you're from CenturyLink, do a better job, because they cannot get good enough bandwidth, and getting real fiber in those areas is really expensive and challenging. There are innovative technologies like point-to-point wireless that are getting better. We do have a problem there. Personally, I think that's where federal government can do something about improving internet access. But all of that said, good in the United States. Now look across the world. We buy bandwidth at Eluvio all over the world. We have tier 1 bandwidth for our fabric. And so I, like many companies that are involved in this kind of thing, know the pricing very well, too well. And in Asia Pacific, it's very biased. It's very expensive. And in fact, so expensive that it's still in a different world as compared to Europe and the US. Tier 1 internet bandwidth has become really affordable in the United States and Europe. It's still tough in Asia. It's still tough in Latin America. And we hope that, overall, that we can continue as a society to pursue, what I would consider more friendly policies. There is an onus on us to make technology to make our use of bandwidth more efficient. And certainly, for myself, I mean, that's one of the sort of most important points of the design of what we do. What we do in the fabric saves enormous numbers of bytes, both in storage and bandwidth over the core, and also in blockchain technologies. The right kind of models are not so compute heavy, right, in their establishing of consensus. And so I think it all goes together. There need be the right kind of efficiency in the architecture, and also, just a continued forward look in how we get good, efficient, low cost bandwidth everywhere.
Great.
Yeah, I can chime in from my perspective, because we have Comcast here, and I've never been a huge fan of Comcast, but I have to say that the internet service has been extraordinary throughout this whole pandemic. They spent a lot of time early on fixing stuff or upgrading, and it's been phenomenal. But I got the same, notice from them. But if you really have to look at like the amount of video you would have to consume to get to those limits is extraordinary. Like, I think they're just trying to put those in place so people don't leave their TV on 24 hours a day, pulling in 1080p streams that, they're not even watching. So, and same thing with, with the mobile, like you have the limits that, to when they slow it down are so high that for 99.5% of the people, you'll never even get near it.
Mm-hmm. Good. Let's shift the discussion to demand generation, and in the direct-to-consumer / over-the-top world. While it's possible, if you're a content creator, to get your content in the hands of anyone directly, making people aware that your content exists and building your brand can be a challenge. And Ty, maybe we could start with you on this. How does LOL Network think about demand generation and distribution of your content?
Sure. It's interesting because when the more places that we're distributed, the more important that question becomes. And that's true even for the largest players in the marketplace right now, because, what you have is the more access you have for distribution, there's an opportunity for the brands, right? The content creators to be disintermediated from the fans, because at the end of the day, a lot of the recognition, the identity, that brand love happens at the individual IP level, right? And so even the savviest of us who, have our preferred platform, still finding ourselves saying, oh, I love that show. Where is it distributed? I saw this trailer for this show. Who's that on? Where can I get that? This cool podcast. Where is it again? And so it's funny because it's like we're in this, sort of like, there's also this tipping point, I think, coming with like mass fragmentation, right? Like all of the cord cutting had to do about releasing the consumer from these very rigid plans where they couldn't get the value that they want. So now it's choose your own adventure. And once you get out there, it can be sort of dizzying, right? We haven't put that onus on our consumers. We've always said, we're going to go wherever you are because you're in all these places, but it creates, but across social, our, owned and operated database. Like I still say, like email is still the workhorse of communication. Having someone mobile number, email address actually still means something as these, sort of like platforms, sort of like ebb and flow. And for us, it's about having a very, distinct stamp on content so that you sort of know something that comes from LOL. And unlike some content providers, we actually do have a direct-to-consumer presence and we have a consumer-facing brand that's recognizable. So it's been about building that brand becomes even more important in the ways that we're distributed. And I gotta say, like we work with some really cool distribution partners where there's a lot of, marketing real estate within those ecosystems, right? Whether we're talking Peacock or Roku or Pluto. So it's about not just sort of how we show up in those contexts and mean something for, to fans when they encounter us there, what it means for, a fan to encounter us across social or when we're going to them in a direct to consumer way, because again, we still put on concerts and sell tickets and transact with, consumers in a very one-to-one basis. So that idea of not even just demand generation, but brand recognition is wildly important. And the more exposed you are, I actually think the more important that becomes. I will say though, that the more choice that's embedded in the ecosystem, there will be, at some point in the relatively near future, I believe, a lot of love given to any company, brand, or entity in the ecosystem who can help make the navigation of those choices simpler, right? Because I think there is a bit of overwhelm in the ecosystem, right? It's great that we have all this content, exactly where to find it, how do you get to it, how do you organize it? Now we're putting all of that onus on the consumer and it can be a lot.
Got it. Michelle, any thoughts on this?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what Ty said in terms of the importance of the, if you will, the relationship to the fan of the creator. And one of the things that also Ty's comment about being able to penetrate through, so your fans can essentially find that right experience. I think one of the things that I alluded to earlier that is absolutely being used as an emergent approach to really increase the relationship is not only direct distribution, but also the idea of really stoking super fandom, right? And I think that's wide open with the blockchain monetization. I mean, the first is obviously collectibles, which take the place of like physical things that you would collect as a fan. But beyond that is also the idea that fans can actually be part of financing content. And I know it may sound far-fetched, but it's not at all with the way that the market is developing for basically blockchain backing of content creation. If everyone knows about Top Shots, of course, with the success with the NBA fan base, if you imagine expanding that from highlights to literally whole fan experiences, and you can essentially get in as an owner of not only a future collectible, but also as an owner of the content itself to help support whatever you want to make. And this can be done at scale. And I think this is the way things are going. All the new marketplace opportunities that we're getting brought into have to do with something like this. And again, the software contracts that are part of the content itself make it possible to do between multiple parties, and then to have fans able to almost experience like you would normally show what you own. You can actually show that digitally as part of your digital identity in a wallet, like a media wallet, for example. And I think people somewhat underestimate how powerful this can be as far as just social identity and these fan communities go. The great thing for creators is if it's done right, I mean, it's absolutely direct. What Ty's talking about, there's no getting away from that. That's how it actually works. And I do think it's going to be on those of us who make platforms for this to make it really easy for self-service. I mean, obviously, this is one of the things we work so hard on with Eluvio Live, make it possible for creators to publish and have essentially their own events that are super high quality with 4K streaming that appear on Apple TV and give them a shot at reaching their fans directly in a major way.
Yeah, no, that's great, that capability that's opened up there. It sounds like Ty and Michelle, you have some interesting things to talk about too after the panel here, just because as live events start to happen, yes, people are going to want to go to them, but they're also going to want to have take advantage of this technology that allows them to experience it as much as possible remotely.
And rewatch, Jonathan, real quick, I might add, I think what Ty said that I see, and again, you have to live it to know it. So it's all happening right now. And what I'm saying here will prove out or not. But what it seems like is happening in our early experiences to what Ty said is obviously people hunger to go and experience things in the real world. And the thing is that there is this sense now of comfort and expectation that you could relive it digitally, right? And I think that's kind of how we see these things, and all of the major productions we're involved in are in person, but also then have this immediate digital window that's opened up beyond. And then the point is to make that low cost, high quality, so you can do it at some scale and not be beholden to Netflix for everything.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. Speaking of live, I just want to touch on one thing, and Michelle, you brought it up at the outset, latency and live. And as we haven't talked about this, but sports and sports betting, that's, I think, just one example of a need for lower latency. And Michelle or anyone, curious what your thoughts are on how important that is and what you see happening in the industry to solve it.
I'm happy to talk on this, but give somebody else a chance if they want to jump in. So, Andy.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in certain industries, it definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, betting is one, auctions is another. I did a project for an auction house called Proxy Bid probably 8 years ago, and they were trying to get it down to 2 seconds at that point, because that was literally technically the only as low as you could possibly make it, and they got it to work. But as close to real time in that type of environment is extremely important. And the same thing with betting, even for simultaneous watching, which I think is going to become more and more important. When they did the NFL draft last spring, which was like the only sports that was going on at the time. It was great. My friends and I were watching it simultaneously, but we were also doing a Zoom so we could talk about it. But one of the people had YouTube TV, and he was like a minute behind everybody else. So we had to pause for a minute so that we were kind of like on the same time frame. So, I can see in those types of examples, it's definitely important. But in a lot of cases where, it's a one-to-many, real big blast, it really doesn't make, that much difference if you're, 5, 10, 20 seconds behind real time, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think the difference between 5 or 10 seconds and 30 is substantial. And one of the interesting things now, to kind of carrying on with what Andy said, is that it's not only possible in what we think of as broadcast over the top streaming technology to have consistent low latency. It's also, the other side of that is to combine that with high quality. And without turning this into an Eluvio commercial, right? Essentially, the core of our technology and its just-in-timeness allows for 4K quality with consistent low latency streaming at internet scale. And by that, I mean, we use a 5-second pullback on our last event, right? So we're talking about 5 seconds end-to-end comfortable 4K globally, right? And that's really important for overall experience in a live scenario. And if you can do it, you want to do that, right? Where sports, of course, it has huge cachet. I think the transactional cases you're talking about are yet another point, right? But to me, I feel like we've been on the verge of that for a long time. There's all the low latency standards that have come out around adaptive bitrate streaming with fragmented MP4. Anyone who's heard me talk on this and down in the weeds knows that my feeling is that if you do it right with the right intermediaries, and you do not need to take on the burdens of the side effects of low latency protocols that try to work around the CDN. In other words, we built the fabric for low latency in the first place, so we don't have these problems. But I think the key to this discussion here is that it does matter for what we consider a best of class experience. But I don't think that once you get into something that is utterly real time, that other than specialized applications where you're looking for more of a WebRTC style experience like this, right? People talking back and forth that getting under that sort of few seconds matters for broadcast, right? Does it matter for betting and transaction cases? Yes, of course it does, right?
Got it. Well, we have only a minute or so left, I think, but maybe Ty, if you want to tell us what you see happening as we come out of the pandemic, changes in behavior of consumers, or what you're looking forward to in your business.
Well, I'm actually looking forward to getting back in the office. And it's funny because over the course of a year, like I think everyone's going through the emotional, like, oh, we could do this forever. And then it's, yeah, not so much. And then it's, when are we reopening? So it's been a much easier conversation, but also taking all of these sort of like new skills, more flexible collaboration, sort of more agile content creation and delivery, like back and, sort of into the future. While I do think that there will be some drop-offs in some of the consumption across platforms, these streaming services are up and launched. And so the demand is going to sustain, I think in terms of the buy side for a while. And I think the fight is on for attention because I think that, consumers will be investing their attention a little bit differently in the months to come. And then we'll see how that pans out. I think for all the speculation that we've done about, the collapsing of the windows theatrically and, and the democratization of content, the future is here. So everyone has to just deal with it. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to taking in-person meetings again. That's a thing. So.
Same here. Well, thank you all very much. And it's been a pleasure, and I'll turn it back over to Eric. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, everyone. That was a terrific discussion. We are going to take a bit of a break at Streaming Media East Connect now, and we will be back in, I think, 2 hours. with a discussion about focusing on the user, UX and UI, and what that all entails. So again, thank you very much. And thanks to our diamond sponsor, Signient, for helping to make Streaming Media East Connect possible.
When the director calls action.
And action.
When the game is on.
Kicking it up, it's good.
Or it's time to save the universe again. Media Shuttle is there. Trusted by more than 25,000 media companies, Media Shuttle delivers, making it easy and secure to send any size file anywhere fast. The journey begins with Media Shuttle portals, customized and branded for any project and designed to be so easy, your end users will love it. All while giving operations teams complete control through a simple yet powerful admin interface. Add users, set permissions, customize file delivery specs, and report on all activity. Blast off with proprietary acceleration technology. Media Shuttle moves your content anywhere in the internet-connected world at hyper speeds. Along the way, your files are protected. Our commitment to enterprise-grade security has made Media Shuttle a preferred tool with Hollywood studios, major sports leagues, broadcasters, and more. With Media Shuttle, your files are never handed over to Signient. File movement is orchestrated between the end user's workstation and your storage, whether on-prem or in the cloud. Your IT team simply provisions your storage, connecting it to the Media Shuttle cloud service, and Signient handles the rest. Get started on your Media Shuttle journey today, a journey without limits.